Dr. McKenna, let's talk about a wild mindset.
Sabbath. So a wild mindset is a whole and intentional leader development mindset. We focus in on this and invite people into that kind of thinking because it is different.
Mhm.
It's different because a wild mindset is a mindset that invites a person's whole story in connection into the whole story of their team members and the whole story of an organization. So it means that we don't piecemeal our approach. It also means that to have a wild mindset is to invite things such as the questions that you're asking are just as important as the answers that you're seeking, and the questions will be critical. And so to come at this from a wild mindset means to not necessarily put aside your previous way of thinking, but to invite broader and deeper thinking into what it means to actually develop human capacity, to develop trust, and to think about what it means to create a high performing organization and the people within it, and to connect the human being and the human doing. So it is a wild mindset. It's kind of going with like that's I always think about wild too as surprising,
Mm.
but also we
Mhm.
already knew that it was true. And so for the rest of us, I think it's a great invitation into thinking a little differently, which I know we're going to get into today.
Welcome to the Wild Conversation podcast, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. McKenna, named among the top 30 most influential IO psychologists and featured in Forbes. Dr. McKenna is the founder of WiLD Leaders and creator of the WiLD Trust platform. His recent TEDx, Becoming a Whole Leader in a Broken World, is a manifesto on the critical role that developing whole and intentional leaders will play in our future. Dr. McKenna has devoted his life to developing leaders and building trust in our organizations. So, Dr. McKenna, help us connect trust, performance, and well being and talk about this developing a wild mindset.
Thank you, Sabbath. Every person you know has a story occurring at the center of their identity and at the center of their progress that is too often expressed as an unanswered question. And that question is, how do I connect my driving purpose to what I am doing every day? We ask it in different ways, but at the core of who we are as human beings is the question that connects the invisible pieces of our hearts with the visible pieces of our actions. It's that often shapeless and less navigated space between our human being and human doing that leaves us wanting more. It's the space between our hearts and our business, our performance and our well being, and the builder and the gardener in us, those two parts of us. That's that part of us that knows we are designed to do something, to build, and to carefully cultivate and tend the delicate garden of relationships that allow us to build together. It is the wild story. That's part of what that wild mindset is all about. And that is our wild mission as well. And the unique wild proposition we are fighting for in the life of leaders, teams, and organizations to connect the systems of organizations with the hearts and minds of the men and women who serve in every organization we serve. Accomplished strategically, if you think about this, how is that accomplished? Strategically, through existing systems and the hearts of human beings. And those systems, things like the succession systems, the coaching conversations, the leader development programs, the performance plans, the operational core, those systems that have historically been so far from the hearts of those who use them and are supposed to benefit from them. It's why we so often hear about organizations where people felt like numbers. And at the same time, build the bridge. How do we build the bridge of trust that connects them together? It connects those operational systems to the hearts of the human beings in those systems and use those systems. And that is what we do. That is why we are here for the organizations that we serve. But let's talk about performance for just a moment. And something that's fascinating is that the culture around us, especially in the United States and probably around the globe as well, tells us that we should take risks, that we should try new things and take advantage of opportunities, but it leaves no room for failure. Leaves no room for failure. On a recent podcast we did with a good friend of mine, Dr. Paul Yost, and I pulled this from some of his writing. He talked about the necessity for job misfit. So often we think about job fit. Job fit is an incredible driver of performance and all kinds of other factors where we need to feel that fit for we as a person to fit with the job and the organization that we're a part of. And he was talking about the necessity for job misfit and the necessity that that's where so much of learning takes place. And that's, by the way, that's a part of a wild mindset as well. This ability to try new things, to take advantage of opportunities. But oftentimes in our culture, there is no room for failure. We can talk about it, but are we actually leaving room for failure? And it is irresponsible to encourage defining ourselves by our risks without leaving room for failure to be not only acceptable, for failure to be acceptable, but actually expected. And it is reckless to dismiss any responsibility for our actions as well, even though our inherent value is not connected to our performance. So the whole reality is that our actions, our progress, the things we do every day, and our performance are crucially important on so many levels. Performance matters. Within us, every action, every accomplishment, and every failure create markers. They're like scars and even gold star rewards, both sides of that tell us something about who we are. And those markers give us information about who we can become and how we will serve others. And they can change how we see ourselves. They impact our efficacy and confidence, our realizations of our limitations and possibilities, and they change our self-perception. And every person in every organization and every family even is deeply impacted by their ability to perform, to accomplish, to see progress. Our actions, I want to be clear about this, our actions do not define our ultimate value, but those markers give us a sense of the realities of what is possible through us and also what is not. So what is performance? Performance is the process of completing a task or fulfilling a role with excellence, learning, and engagement. So let me say that again. Performance is the process of completing a task or fulfilling a role with excellence, learning, and engagement. And when our performance comes into direct contact with the performance of another person, it gets interesting, right? And then another, and then another. And we begin to see the irresistible reality of the importance of people working together. As we grow ourselves and our organizations, we realize that we must grow together if we are to accomplish the grand plan and goals that have been placed before us or that we have put in place. I know that the leaders that we work with will resonate with that. It's one thing to understand how we grow ourselves, but when we begin to grow each other, we begin to become aware of one another, things begin to change. And we call that a team. And a team's performance together is the culmination of all those individual performances, if you think about it that way, serving toward a shared mission. And as I once heard it said, this was actually on the wall of my son's band teacher at one point, practice is where I learn my part, and rehearsal is where I learn everyone else's. We are wired to perform, excel, make progress, and build, and most of us are either wired to do that together or soon realize that we won't survive long if we don't. So performance is a critical part of the human experience of work and of life, but it is never enough to answer our deeper questions of why we're here, especially if we think about performance in a vacuum. So let me say something about the well-being of the one and the well-being of the many. And that is, performance will never be enough. Too many of us have experienced the emptiness of accomplishment alone and felt the vacuum of identity and purpose that follows. Why was it not enough to get that job or to achieve that big paycheck, or for some of us to build that perfect product or to get that degree? The achievements and our performance create the markers and belief that we could do it again and do it better. But it will never be enough. Every person in our organization either is hanging on to the lie that performances will be enough, or they are fully aware that it's not, and they are repeatedly striving for a purpose without a map toward it. And too many feel only a small dose of treatment in the form of a quiet desperation that is screaming out inside of them. Too many people feel that desperation. And well-being is a place within each of us that knows that there is more. There is more than performance, even though performance matters. But we also know that it is less like a push out and more like a dive within. That well-being is a whole picture of who we are, why we are, how we're doing, who we love, and why we love them, and our inherent value. This is what well-being is. Well-being is the whole state of human being and human doing that connects productivity to the heart, fulfillment to our spirits, and clarity to our wide open learning. A whole state. Well-being is a whole state that will never separate our physical, emotional, and relational health. And as long as our organizations are full of human beings doing, working, and learning together, the tension between our well-being and our performance will also be inseparable. To be well is to be progressing, scaling, and growing while learning. And leads to the often invisible question of purpose and worth within each of us. However, I have to say this, instead of fighting for both our performance and well-being, we too often have over-pivoted toward one or the other, creating one more near miss in our attempts to both scale well and invest in people well. And when we over-pivot to the health and identity of the individual over the needs of the organization or the many, we miss the reality that building and growing together is a part of our created way as human beings. And when we turn all of our attention to the industrialization and scaling and growth of our organization, the value perceived by our stakeholders or investors, we over-pivot there, or even toward our exit strategy, we not only lose long-term value, but we lose our souls in the process. And I want to suggest to you that we must build a bridge of trust. And let me tell you why. Too often, we try to solve the performance and well-being problems of our organizations separately, the human being and the human doing separately, treating them as battles we must win and overcome one at a time. And this is why so many development programs, team building sessions, or organizational interventions, they fail. They do not directly link performance to the motivational and personal journey every person is working through. It's also why operational systems, pro formas, or sales training programs will never create the long-term and sustaining value we're seeking without linking the thinking, feeling, and driving forces within a person. The visible and invisible parts of organizing are already connected within each of us. So approaches and mindsets that assume they are parallel and not intersecting will miss what's really happening. What is the bridge between them? How do we unlock the human and organizational potential that exists within and between us? Within and between us. That bridge between our human being and our human doing is trust. Trust within each of us, trust between us, and trust among us. Trust causes me to push my team into moments of change, fully trusting they can handle it. Trust is what allows me to delegate effectively and do as I live into the possibility and confidence that my team members will have my back, both professionally and personally. Trust is what allows us to lean into our operational systems and execute well as we use them. Trust is what connects the promise of a salesperson to the solution provided to a customer through our products. Trust is what says, I'm going to decide to work with you instead of someone else. Trust means you know me and I know you. It does not mean that we are perfect or we may not fulfill the promise to each other perfectly, but that we will work at it. Trust requires us to know ourselves. This is so key. Trust requires us to know ourselves and to share that knowledge with each other. Here is what trust is, a definition of trust. Trust is your belief in my integrity, my ability, my reliability, my strength, and that I'm telling you the truth when any of those things are lacking. And it is my belief in the same in you. And yes, trust is multifaceted and requires all of those things to be built. Each piece of the trust puzzle is necessary, but not sufficient on its own. Integrity, as a part of that, is me doing what you need and want to be done. Ability is your belief that I can do it. Reliability is whether I will do it consistently. Strength is whether or not you believe I will do it well. And truth is your belief that I will be honest with you when any of those things are lacking. Trust is belief, but with teeth. If I believe in you, I will believe that you will catch me if I fall. If I have trust in you, I will take the risk of actually falling. We require it every day to make anything in our world work. Without trust, no fine-tuned operational system will be effective for long. And my team members won't take action. Without trust, we will avoid risk because the possibility of failing before we even get off the ground is too strong. Without trust, I will spend most of my time on working and maintaining relationships over making progress. Trust is so necessary, but to understand trust, we must focus our attention on some fundamentals that change everything. Building an organization where people thrive and the organization performs is within reach, but it requires a reformation in how we think about developing leaders and investing in our employees, how we set up operational systems, and how we build deep and sustaining trust. It's not a revolution, but a reformation, an application of what most already know to be true that is supported by decades of research. It will require a willingness to allow people to tell their whole story more accurately or discover it more truthfully. So let me finish with this. That is the WiLD mindset and the foundation behind our methodology and every assessment and technology that is building long-term value and inspiration for our partners as they intentionally connect performance, well-being, and trust.
Thank you for listening to this WiLD Conversation podcast. Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our WiLD Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the WiLD Trust platform, and get started with the WiLD Trust Index today.